Welcome to Silent Secrets. I'm your host for tonight's mystery. Today's tale begins with a quiet moment, a simple knock, a forgotten letter, and a truth that was never meant to be discovered. Chapter 1. A gift remembered the house was at its most beautiful when nothing had yet gone wrong. Candlelight softened the stone walls of Langford Manor, lending warmth to corners that by daylight appeared austere. Evergreen garlands traced the banisters with careful symmetry. From the far end of the drawing room came the subdued sound of a string quartet, positioned just beyond sight, so that the music seemed to belong to the house itself, rather than to any performer. Everything had been arranged with intention. Hercule Poirot observed this at once. He stood near the fireplace, hands folded neatly behind his back, his polished shoes placed at an exact angle to the hearth rug. His eyes moved slowly, methodically, taking in the proportions of the room, the spacing of chairs, the placement of guests in relation to one another. To Poirot, harmony was not aesthetic alone. It was psychological. Order revealed character, disorder revealed motive, and yet, amid all this careful elegance, something was not quite in balance. The Christmas tree stood near the tall windows, its light steady, its ornaments evenly distributed. Beneath it lay the gifts, arranged not casually but deliberately, as though an unseen hand had rehearsed their placement. Boxes of silver, green, and cream formed a pleasing circle. At its center rested a single package wrapped in deep crimson paper. Poirot's gaze paused. The color was wrong. Not garish, not festive, but intense. The ribbon had been tied with mathematical precision, the bow aligned so perfectly it seemed less a gesture than a statement. It drew the eye without demanding it, like a presence that required no introduction. Poirot felt, rather than thought, a flicker of disquiet. A gift, he reflected silently, is a form of communication one does not give without intent. He was a tall man, his silver hair neatly combed, his bearing confident in the way of those long accustomed to being obeyed without protest. His home reflected him, dignified, restrained, quietly commanding. Yet even as he smiled, his eyes betrayed him. They moved, briefly and involuntarily, toward the tree. Poirot noticed. Dinner passed with impeccable smoothness. Conversation flowed, never straying into discomfort, never lingering too long on anything of substance. It was a gathering of people who knew how to speak without revealing too much, how to listen without committing themselves. Poirot listened carefully. Eleanor Markham, Langford's niece, spoke with controlled warmth, her words chosen with care. Jonathan Reeves, seated 2 places down, laughed easily, but watched the table more than the speakers. Margaret Hale, quiet and observant, noticed who interrupted whom, and who never did. Nothing was said of consequence. That, Poirot knew, was itself of consequence. When coffee was served, and the guests returned to the drawing room, anticipation settled over them like a thin veil. The music softened. Someone adjusted the fire. The tree lights seemed suddenly brighter. Arthur Langford rose from his chair. "My friends," he said, smiling, "it is time for our little tradition." They gathered near the tree. Wrapping paper rustled. Polite laughter followed as gifts were exchanged, each accompanied by a remark calculated to amuse without offending. Poirot watched the rhythm of it all. One by one the packages disappeared, until only the crimson one remained. Langford's movement toward it was almost imperceptibly slower. He lifted the box, weighing it in his hands. For a fraction of a second, his smile faltered. Not enough for most to see, but enough for Poirot. "This," Langford said evenly, "appears to be for me." He set it upon a small table. The room seemed to hold its breath. Poirot stepped forward. "Before you open it," he said gently, "permit me to ask, were you expecting this gift, monsieur?" Langford's fingers tightened on the ribbon. "I was expecting many things tonight," he replied. This was not one of them. He untied the bow. The lid lifted for a heartbeat. No one spoke. Poirot did not move. He did not need to see the object clearly to understand that something irreversible had occurred. Langford swayed. The color left his face with astonishing speed. His mouth opened, as though to speak, but no sound emerged. He clutched the edge of the table, knocking the box sideways. Poirot spoke once, sharply. Do not touch anything." Langford collapsed, as others rushed forward in panic. Poirot remained still, his eyes fixed not on the fallen man, but on the crimson paper, now torn and discarded on the floor. The gift had done precisely what it was meant to do, and the evening, so carefully arranged, had finally revealed its true design. Chapter 2. The Christmas gathering the snow fell with an almost deliberate serenity, blanketing the Langford estate in a thick, muffled silence. Each flake seemed to insist upon perfect stillness, sealing the house from the world outside, as though the elements themselves wished to protect or conceal what was to come. The driveway bore no new tire marks, no footprints beyond those that had long since faded, and the bare trees shook with the weight of the snow in solemn acknowledgement of the season. From the windows, the glowing light of the house spilled outward, soft and golden, offering a promise of warmth and security. Yet even the most flawless facade can hide fissures, and Poirot, as always, was attuned to the subtleties that others overlooked. Inside, the Langford estate was alive with genteel activity. The drawing room, spacious and ornate, had been transformed for the no-fade gathering into a display of restrained festivity. Evergreen garlands were draped along the mantels and doorways, candles glimmered on polished tables, their reflections doubling in the windows and mirrors with careful symmetry. Crystal bowls brimmed with fruit, nuts, and sweets, though no one touched them yet. The air carried the scent of pine and wax, faintly sweet, subtly perfumed by fires burning in multiple hearths. Guests milled about, exchanging pleasantries that hovered somewhere between warmth and formality. Laughter rose in measured cadence, restrained and elegant, designed to amuse without provoking anything resembling conflict. Here was the delicate theatre of propriety. Smiles measured, gestures refined, words polished. Poirot moved quietly among them, his small frame perfectly upright, his hands folded in that habitual pose of introspection. His eyes, sharp and calculating, darted from one face to another, capturing the smallest twitches of the mouth, the slight shifts in posture, the unspoken tension behind each polite word. It was a room alive with appearances. Yet Poirot's experience told him that appearances were invariably deceptive. A gathering such as this, arranged with such careful attention to detail, was always a stage. And every stage, sooner or later, revealed the cracks in its set. At the far end of the room, beneath the tall Christmas tree, lay the crimson gift. It had not moved since its placement, its bow tied with impeccable precision, the paper rich and intense in color. Poirot's eyes lingered upon it, drawn not by its size nor its luxury, but by the peculiar weight of expectation that seemed to emanate from it. "This," he murmured softly to himself, "is a gift that waits not for hands, but for understanding. It is like a thought not yet expressed." Nearby, Victor Hale, the host for this part of the evening, greeted his guests with ease that only long practice could achieve. Hale was a man in the prime of life, with a tall, commanding figure, dark hair meticulously combed, and eyes that carried a faint shadow of calculation behind their outward warmth. He smiled, inclined his head, and engaged in the expected exchanges of cordiality. Yet Poirot noted the minute glances Victor cast toward the tree, particularly at the crimson package. The man's composure did not waver, but the flicker in his expression, a micro-expression almost too brief to catch, was enough for Poirot to register its significance. Guests included a mixture of family and long-standing acquaintances, all carefully chosen to maintain the evening's delicate balance. Eleanor Markham, Langford's niece, stood nearby in a pale green gown, her posture elegant and reserved. Yet Poirot saw the tiny tension in her shoulders, a subtle rigidity that betrayed her unease. Jonathan Reeves, the young associate of the household, leaned casually against a doorway, but his restless movements suggested impatience beneath the cultivated charm he projected. And Margaret Hale, Victor's cousin, watched quietly from a corner, her expression soft yet analytical, as though cataloguing each word and gesture with meticulous care. The initial exchanges of the evening were formal and polite. Small talk flowed around the room in measured phrases, inquiries about health, light remarks about the weather. comments on recent travels. Poirot, however, noticed that beneath these courteous veneers ran the faint currents of suppressed emotions. Slight rivalries, unspoken resentments, and small vanities moved among the guests, like currents under the still surface of a winter lake. Dinner was served promptly. The long table, adorned with a white cloth and taper candles, offered a scene of elegance. Silverware gleamed, glasses caught the light with precise brilliance, and each course arrived at the exact moment it should. Delivered by discreet staff whose presence was felt but never intrusive. Conversation during the meal was polite, but careful. The laughter controlled, the compliments restrained. It was a study in social precision, the kind of evening designed to impress without risk, to delight without offense. Even as the meal proceeded, Poirot's attention never wavered from the people around him, nor from the Crimson Gift, which sat silently near the tree, a patient sentinel of something unspoken. He noted how Eleanor's gaze occasionally flicked toward it, how Jonathan's hand twitched slightly when he thought no one was watching, and how Margaret's subtle frown deepened ever so slightly when her eyes fell upon it. After the final course, the guests returned to the drawing room, coffee in hand. The fire's glow played across the polished floor, warming the room with flickering light. The string quartet continued softly in the background, now barely audible over the subdued murmur of conversation. Everyone knew what would come next, the presentation of gifts, but no one spoke of it openly, as though acknowledging it prematurely might hasten some undesired outcome. Poirot, seated quietly on a settee, observed the movement of each guest as they drifted closer to the tree. There was a rhythm to the proceedings, an almost choreographed elegance to the exchanges. Yet within that rhythm, he could detect the moments that betrayed genuine feeling, the hesitation before lifting a gift, the fractional intake of breath at a particular package, the subtle, almost imperceptible flinch of the hand when passing another guest. At last, Victor Hale stepped forward. His posture was impeccable, his voice, when he spoke, carried that quiet authority which had become a family hallmark. "Shall we proceed?" he asked. A hint of warmth in his tone, carefully measured. The guests nodded, smiles polite, eyes flicking toward the tree. The Crimson Gift remained untouched. It waited, silent and deliberate, as though aware that it was the fulcrum upon which the evening balanced. Poirot, as he watched, felt the peculiar sense of inevitability that often preceded the first motion of a carefully planned chain of events. One should never underestimate a gift, he thought. For it is not merely an object, but a messenger, and the messenger does not always deliver what is expected. Victor reached for the crimson box, fingers brushing its surface. For a brief moment, the room seemed suspended. Conversations faltered mid-phrase, a candle flickered. Everyone felt it, the intangible tension that signals the crossing from harmless festivity into something more precarious. Poirot did not speak. He did not need to. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, followed Victor's hand, noting the minuscule tremor in the fingers, the barely perceptible narrowing of the eyes. The host's smile remained, but only as a mask. Beneath it lay the first stirrings of surprise, apprehension, and uncertainty. The guests gathered closer, forming a semicircle, their polite chatter now hushed by anticipation. The Crimson Gift sat at the center of it all, patient, waiting. It was a promise, a question, a challenge. And Poirot knew, instinctively, that the evening's true character would reveal itself not in laughter or conversation, but in the moment when the gift's secret came to light. For now, it remained still, perfect, and enigmatic. Like an idea yet to be spoken, a thought waiting for the precise instant to unfold. Chapter 3. The unopened present midnight had arrived quietly, without ceremony, yet its presence was undeniable. In the drawing room of Langford Manor, the grand clock in the hallway struck 12, its sonorous chimes echoing through the high-ceiling chambers, reverberating against the polished walls and gilded frames. The sound was at once celebratory and admonitory, an invisible signal that the hour had arrived, the hour when expectation and reality converge. Victor Hale, the host, remained at the center of the room, the crimson gift poised before him like a small monument of possibility. His hands hovered over the package, brushing its surface lightly, as though feeling for the pulse of the secret within. All around him, the guests lingered, polite curiosity in their eyes, restrained excitement in their posture. Not a sound rose above the gentle rustle of garments or the quiet crackle of the fire. Even the string quartet performing now at the far end of the room played in tones subdued and deliberate, as if aware that any note too loud might disturb the delicate tension. Poirot, seated to one side, observed with his usual composure, yet his small, brilliant mind worked at extraordinary speed. Every detail, however trivial it seemed to others, was meticulously logged. The faint tremor in Victor's fingers, the ever-slight narrowing of his eyes, the micro-shifts of the guests' glances toward the gift, each gesture more revealing than the polite masks worn so carefully. The crimson box was enigmatic in its silence. Its wrapping was flawless, its bow perfect. Yet there was a weight to it, a latent force, unspoken, which made its very presence commanding. Poirot felt, as he often did, that the object possessed a subtle personality, that it could communicate in ways beyond mere words. Victor took a breath and, with the air of a man performing a ceremonial duty, leaned forward. His fingers closed around the ribbon, lifting it delicately. The room seemed to pause, time stretching as though to grant the gift its full significance. Then, abruptly, it happened. Victor's knees buckled. A sudden stagger, barely perceptible at first, sent him lurching against the edge of a small table. He grasped at the surface instinctively, but the table's polished veneer offered no purchase. A crystal glass toppled, shattering on the floor. Wine spilled across the carpet, dark and glistening, spreading like spilled ink across the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. The sound, a brief, sharp crash, cut through the silent room, drawing startled gasps from the guests. Poirot was instantly on his feet, moving with precision and calm, as though the very act of maintaining order might restore equilibrium to the chaos. He reached Victor in 2 steps, noting the way the man's fingers clutched at nothing, the slight blanching of his skin, the shallow, irregular rise and fall of his chest. "Monsieur Hale," Poirot said gently, but with a firmness that brooked no argument. "Sit. Calm yourself. You have been startled." Victor's lips parted, as though to speak, but no words emerged. His dark eyes, usually so assured, widened slightly with disorientation. The crimson gift remained untouched, its surface unmarred, its bow still perfect, almost defiant in the midst of turmoil. The guests reacted with a mixture of shock and polite concern. Eleanor Markham stepped forward first, her face a careful mask of composure, though Poirot noticed the tension in her fingers as they clutched the folds of her gown. Jonathan Reeves hovered nearby, his natural restlessness now tinged with alarm, while Margaret Hale's calm exterior belied the sharp focus of her eyes, noting every small detail of the incident. Poirot crouched slightly to examine Victor, taking in the subtle cues that others missed. There was no sign of external trauma, no mark upon the man's skin, no apparent obstruction, yet the staggering, the sudden weakness, the near loss of balance, it all indicated an internal disturbance. Poirot's mind, trained to see patterns where others saw chaos, immediately began forming hypotheses, weighing possibilities. "This is no ordinary faint," he said softly, so that only himself could hear. "It is intentional, subtle, precise, deliberate." He rose, glancing at the crimson gift. Its presence now seemed almost accusatory, its silence laden with implication. The room's attention inevitably shifted toward it, and Poirot noticed the way guests' gazes flickered, not merely at the box but at one another, seeking reassurance or explanation. A gift in this context had become a symbol, a pivot upon which suspicion might turn. Victor, finally regaining a measure of control, sank into a nearby armchair. His breath was shallow but steadying. He attempted a small, reassuring smile, which failed to convince anyone. I am all right," he said, voice faint but measured. "Just startled. That is all." Poirot approached, his steps silent but decisive. "Monsieur," he said gently, the manner of your stumble. There is a story in it. Perhaps you do not yet understand it yourself, but the gift there," he gestured subtly toward the crimson box, "is central. It is speaking even in silence. Do not open it yet." The guests murmured quietly among themselves, some attempting reassurance, others exchanging furtive glances as if questioning the stability of the evening. Yet Poirot's calm, commanding presence seemed to impose order. He looked at the spilled wine, the shattered crystal, and then back at the untouched gift. "Notice," he said softly, though enough for attentive ears to catch the words, "how the chaos surrounds the box. Yet the box itself remains pure, perfect, unbroken. That is no accident. The intention is deliberate. The messenger is cunning." He allowed his gaze to sweep across the guests. Each one's reaction was telling: Eleanor's subtle tension, Jonathan's flickering impatience, Margaret's quiet calculation. They were, unknowingly, participants in a drama far more intricate than any of them realized. Poirot's mind worked rapidly. He catalogued the scene, the timing of Victor's stumble, the trajectory of the glass, the position of the gift, the sequence of reactions among the guests. Each element, though apparently random, could be a carefully placed clue, a fragment of a carefully constructed design. He bent slightly, inspecting the gift's packaging with meticulous attention. There was nothing visibly out of place. No tear, no uneven fold, no misaligned corner. And yet, the very aura of it, the latent presence of danger, was palpable. Poirot felt, instinctively, that the gift had been prepared not merely to delight, but to manipulate, to provoke, to challenge perception itself. "You see," he murmured to himself, "it is not the hand that touches the object which is dangerous. It is the design, the thought behind it, the purpose. One must observe the invisible as keenly as the visible." Victor's breath had steadied sufficiently for him to speak again, his voice quieter, now measured, controlled. I should like the gift removed," he said. There was no fear in his tone, only the faint trace of unease carefully masked by civility. Poirot inclined his head slightly, considering. "Yes, monsieur," he said softly, "but we shall handle it with care, for the gift is clever. It waits, observing even now, and the cleverest dangers are those which remain unopened." The guests, reassured by Poirot's calm authority, gradually relaxed, though the air remained taut with suspense. The crimson box, still intact, sat as the silent focal point of the room. Its unbroken bow, its smooth, flawless paper, and its poised stillness all conspired to keep the tension alive. Poirot, seated now once more, allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible frown. The evening had shifted. What began as a celebration, meticulously arranged and carefully orchestrated, had taken its first steps toward revelation, and he, Hercule Poirot, had already perceived the first outlines of a design far more intricate than anyone else suspected. In that moment, the unassuming gift beneath the tree had transformed from mere decoration to a silent accuser, a patient herald of the mysteries that were about to unfold. Chapter 4. Death in Celebration. The drawing room of Langford Manor had been transformed in less than an hour. Where once polite laughter and measured conversation had filled the space, there was now silence, a brittle, trembling quiet that seemed to hold every footfall, every breath, and every heartbeat captive. The fire burned steadily in the hearth, but its warmth no longer comforted. It only illuminated the tension etched upon the faces of the assembled guests. Victor Hale sat slumped in the armchair, a pale shadow of the composed man he had been only minutes before. The crimson gift remained on the small table, untouched, its presence both accusatory and enigmatic. Poirot, standing beside the fallen host, observed with meticulous attention, noting the subtle ways the body betrayed the invisible workings of fate. When Dr. Latham, the family physician, arrived, he moved with professional efficiency, his hands gloved and eyes sharp. He examined Victor Hale, feeling the pulse, observing the pupils, noting the faint trembling in the extremities. The result, though stated calmly, carried a weight that settled upon the room like a frost. Poison swift and deliberate. No struggle, no convulsion, only timing. This was planned. A collective intake of breath filled the chamber. The string quartet, long dismissed, had left the music to linger faintly in memory alone. Outside, the snow fell with a quiet persistence, oblivious to the violence of human affairs indoors. Poirot remained silent for the moment, absorbing each nuance, cataloguing every observation with the speed and precision of a master detective at work. Timing, sequence, behavior, all were now critical. He allowed his gaze to pass over the guests, seeing the careful masks each had hastily adopted. Eleanor Markham, pale yet composed, gripped the folds of her gown as though drawing a protective barrier around herself. Jonathan Reeves, usually so self-assured, shifted nervously, his restless energy now tinged with apprehension. Margaret Hale, calm and observant, crossed her arms, her eyes scanning each face, as though trying to read invisible scripts written upon skin and posture. Poirot spoke at last, his voice soft but firm, carrying the weight of subtle authority. "Miss Amos, it is not mere misfortune that brings us here, it is intention. Every moment, every detail, has been carefully orchestrated. The crime was prepared and executed with precision. That is the first fact we must acknowledge." The guests murmured quietly, eyes flicking toward one another. Christmas cheer, already a fragile veneer, had collapsed into suspicion, and in the sudden quiet, it was almost palpable. A living thing pressing upon the room. Poirot moved toward the Crimson Gift, his small steps measured. He examined it carefully, running his fingers lightly along the edges, noting the folds of the paper, the symmetry of the bow, the absence of any outward tampering. Nothing appeared amiss. Yet he knew better. Danger rarely announces itself so plainly. The object of the crime was often silent and unremarkable, its efficacy lying precisely in its invisibility. Dr. Latham stepped back, gesturing gently toward the guests. "I must inform you, the poison was fast, acting very likely administered moments before he reached for the gift. There was no opportunity for interference, no struggle. This was calculated." Poirot inclined his head slightly, absorbing the statement. He noticed the timing with precision. Victor's stumble, the shattered glass, the brief panic. All of it had been a prelude, a small overture before the final act of poison took effect. The guests, frozen and uncertain, exchanged cautious glances. Each face was carefully composed. Yet the strain was visible in the smallest movements, the twitch of a finger, the slight furrow of a brow, the barely perceptible tightening of lips. "Observe," Poirot said, his voice low but carrying to attentive ears, "that a crime of this nature does not occur in isolation. It requires preparation, opportunity, and motive. All are present here. The question we must ask ourselves is not merely who, but why and how." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the smoke of the burning logs. Poirot's eyes, small and sharp, moved from one guest to another, assessing reactions with the precision of a scientist observing a specimen. Eleanor's gaze flitted to the floor, then to the tree. Jonathan's eyes flicked repeatedly toward the crimson package. Then away. Margaret's expression remained impassive, yet her mind, Poirot knew, was working faster than any spoken words could reveal. Poirot crouched slightly, examining Victor Hale with meticulous care. There were no marks on the skin, no outward signs of violence. The timing, Dr. Latham confirmed, was the only clue. A man collapses when he touches an object that seems innocuous. The danger was concealed in plain sight, a signature of cunning, intellect, and planning. "Timing, mes amis," Poirot murmured almost to himself, "is the greatest of subtle instruments. The one who orchestrates it is not merely clever. They are patient, calculating, and confident. Too confident sometimes, but sufficiently so to believe that chaos can be controlled." He rose, casting a careful glance across the room. Every movement mattered now. Every reaction was a potential clue. The spilled wine, the shattered crystal, the sudden hush of the guests. All were pieces in a puzzle that had yet to be fully revealed. Poirot's eyes returned to the Crimson Gift. In its stillness, in its perfect, untouched form, it communicated more than any witness could. It had been the catalyst, the instrument, the silent agent of death. And yet it remained unbroken, untarnished, proof that the crime was meticulous and deliberate. Outside, the snow continued to fall, unmindful of human suffering. Inside, the warmth of the fire was powerless against the chill of fear and suspicion. Poirot, standing at the center of it all, felt the familiar stirrings of anticipation. The evening, once carefully arranged for merriment, had transformed into a stage for inquiry. Each guest was now both observer and observed, and the detective's task was to uncover the hidden threads that connected them to the crime. Poirot addressed the guests again, his voice calm, precise, and commanding. "We must understand one principle. No crime of this sort occurs by accident. There is an architect behind every moment. It is our duty to discern the patterns, to see what is invisible to others. And the first pattern is clear: the gift, the moment of collapse, the timing, these are deliberate. Now we observe, we listen, and we reason." The guests shifted uneasily. Christmas cheer had vanished entirely, replaced by suspicion, fear, and the weight of unspoken questions. Poirot's eyes, however, gleamed with quiet certainty. In the stillness, in the subtlety of the movements, in the micro-reactions of every person in the room, he already began to perceive the outlines of truth. The crimson gift remained at the center of the room, patient, accusing, silent. It was more than paper and ribbon. It was the messenger of intentions, the herald of consequences. And Poirot, as always, would listen carefully to what it, and the people around it, had to say. Chapter 5. A house of motives. The fire in the Langford drawing room had burned low, casting long, quivering shadows across the polished floor. The guests, though still formally seated, were no longer the same people who had arrived with measured smiles and carefully exchanged greetings. The death of Victor Hale, sudden and precise, had stripped the evening of its artifice. Polite conversation had given way to a tense quiet, the kind that spoke of thoughts too dangerous to voice aloud. The room felt smaller, though nothing had changed. Suspicion, like a silent, invisible visitor, had claimed dominion. Poirot, small and deliberate, sat near the hearth, observing the assembly with the scrutiny of a surgeon examining a subtle, complex injury. Each face, each gesture, each fleeting glance was now a potential clue. Each word or hesitation, a thread in the tangled web that had led to murder. The room itself, decorated with garlands and candles, seemed now almost cruelly ironic. Christmas cheer imposed upon a gathering transformed into a theater of hidden motives. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice soft yet authoritative. "We are faced not merely with a death, but with opportunity, desire, and fear. We must consider, very carefully, who stood to gain, who stood to lose, and how such intentions could have been executed with such precision." He allowed the weight of his words to settle over the guests. His gaze moved first to Helena Hale, Victor's sister, a woman of careful appearance and deliberate speech. She had seated herself near the edge of the room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes were calm, but Poirot noticed the faint quiver at the corner of her mouth, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the way her shoulders stiffened, as though bracing herself against the cold air of accusation. Helena's connection to Victor's will was well known. The new provisions, prepared quietly in the months prior to No Feal, had shifted substantial inheritance away from her, leaving her to fear a decline in social and financial standing. Such a motive, though subtle, was undeniably present. Poirot catalogued it, noting that fear of ruin can drive even the most composed individual to desperate action. He turned his attention to Jonathan Reeves, the assistant, though outwardly cheerful, poised, and competent. Poirot had long suspected a certain nervous energy in him. The missing funds, a discrepancy in Victor Hale's accounts, slight but detectable, were known only to a small circle of confidants. Reeves's composure, like Helena's, was carefully maintained, yet the faint twitch in his fingers and the rapidity with which he adjusted his cufflinks betrayed a mind burdened with concern. Exposure, financial and reputational, is as powerful a motivator as greed itself. Poirot made a mental note Opportunity and temptation are often inseparable. Margaret Hale, Victor's quiet nephew, sat slightly apart, his posture impeccable, but his eyes calculating. He had always been reserved, careful not to reveal intentions. Yet the inheritance he stood to gain, now more considerable than ever, provided a subtle undercurrent to his otherwise mild demeanor. Poirot observed him carefully, the slight flicker of his gaze toward the crimson gift, the tightening of his jaw when conversation brushed too closely upon Victor's recent decisions, all indicated awareness. Awareness of stakes, awareness of advantage. Poirot's small, dark eyes moved with precision across the remaining guests, cataloguing their subtle reactions. Each possessed motive, each had proximity, each had opportunity. The question was not merely whether any of them had acted, but how the act could have been so perfectly executed. The poison, the timing, the seamless collapse. It required skill, patience, and knowledge of the victim's habits. He rose, stepping quietly into the center of the room. The glow of the fire outlined him sharply, his small frame imposing despite its size, a figure of quiet authority. "Observe, messamis," he said. "That motive alone does not suffice. There must be means, opportunity, and above all, a careful mind. And yet, we do not dismiss motive, for motive often guides the hand that executes what reason alone cannot justify." Poirot's gaze returned to the crimson gift. Its stillness, unbroken and pristine, was a silent testament to deliberate orchestration. Even in death, the package exerted influence, holding the room in a tense equilibrium. Each guest was drawn to it, consciously or unconsciously, as if acknowledging its central role in the drama that had unfolded. He moved closer to Helena Hale, speaking softly. "Madame, may I ask, were you aware of any recent discussions regarding the inheritance? Any disagreement that could have caused irritation?" Helena's eyes met his with measured composure. "We all have our expectations," she replied smoothly. "But I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I would never act upon mere discontent. Victor's decisions were his alone." Poirot inclined his head, noting carefully the micro-expressions, the subtle flicker of tension around her eyes, and the brief, involuntary tightening of her lips. He catalogued each with mental precision, aware that even the most careful denial could leave traces. Next, he turned to Jonathan Reeves. "And you, monsieur, were there any occasions where discrepancies might have arisen in the accounts? Any possibility of exposure?" Reeves' smile was almost too quick, almost rehearsed. "Of course not," he said, though the rapid blink betrayed a momentary anxiety. Poirot noted it with clinical accuracy. Opportunity, once imagined, can become urgent. Desperation is often silent until it reaches its apex. Margaret Hale's expression remained calm, but Poirot observed the subtle shift in her posture, the way her eyes lingered on the crimson gift, longer than propriety would dictate. He considered her quietly, reserved, intelligent, patient. A subtlety of character often conceals the sharpest intentions. Poirot moved back toward the center of the room, allowing his gaze to sweep over all present. Each person's motive was clear, yet none had acted openly. Yet Poirot's mind, trained to observe invisible threads, registered patterns that were not immediately visible to the casual observer. Small movements, brief glances, and hesitations formed a lattice of clues. "Notice," Poirot said, almost to himself but audible, "how even in warmth, comfort, and apparent familiarity, the mind can be driven by ambition, fear, and desire. A house of celebration may conceal a house of motives, and it is in such houses that the cleverest designs are executed. Quietly, elegantly, without sound, without struggle, but with precision." He paused, letting the words sink into the room, allowing the guests to feel the weight of scrutiny. Their Christmas cheer had been replaced with a careful awareness, a recognition that intentions, hidden and potent, could dictate events as surely as any visible act. Poirot's eyes returned to the crimson gift. Here in this small package lies more than ribbon and paper. It is the symbol of desire, the instrument of fate, and perhaps the witness to ambition. It waits patiently, observing, as do I, and when it speaks, the truth will be unmistakable. Outside, The snow continued its steady fall, blanketing the estate in unyielding silence. Inside, the Langford house had transformed from a place of warmth and celebration to a theatre of suspicion, of motives carefully catalogued, of secrets lying just beneath the surface. Poirot, ever observant, understood that the next steps, questions, examinations, revelations, would demand the utmost precision. And so he prepared, as he always did, to follow the threads wherever they led, guided by the invisible, meticulous hand of reason, in a house where every heart harbored intention and every silence spoke volumes. Chapter 6. The crimson thread. The Langford drawing-room had fallen into an uneasy rhythm after the earlier commotion. Guests lingered near the hearth, some attempting conversation, others silently observing, their movements constrained by a pervasive awareness of suspicion. The fire's warmth, though generous, did little to thaw the chill of apprehension. Outside, the snow continued its quiet accumulation, isolating the house, and in doing so, creating a perfect stage for inquiry and revelation. Poirot, as always, remained composed. His small frame moved with deliberate precision as he crouched near the Crimson Gift, hands gloved and fingertips lightly brushing the surface of the meticulously tied ribbon. He had already examined the package once, but now, in the quiet aftermath of Victor Hale's collapse, he sought a deeper understanding. Each detail, he knew, might reveal the mind of the person who had orchestrated this drama. "Notice," he murmured, almost to himself, "how perfection can be deceptive. The ribbon is flawless, and yet even in perfection, the hand leaves its signature." He extracted a slender magnifying glass from his coat pocket, holding it close to the ribbon's fibers. The thread was red, deep crimson, carefully selected, uniform in weave, and almost imperceptibly frayed at one edge. Poirot's keen eye detected an anomaly, tiny traces clinging to the fibers, residue of the wine from Victor Hale's glass, faint but unmistakable. Poirot straightened slightly, his mind moving at the speed of reasoning, cataloguing, connecting. The discovery was subtle yet crucial. The same fibers present on the ribbon were also found on the stem of the wine glass that had fallen and shattered earlier. Someone, he realized, had handled both objects. Recently, deliberately, and with remarkable calm. "Ah," he murmured, his voice a soft cadence of intellect. "It is the little things that speak the loudest. The thread, the glass, the touch. Each detail whispers the story of its owner. And yet, the story is concealed until one knows how to listen." Poirot's gaze swept across the room, observing each guest in turn. Eleanor Markham sat with her hands neatly folded, attempting composure yet unable to prevent a faint tension from shaping her posture. Jonathan Reeves, restless even in stillness, rubbed his fingers together ever so subtly, a nervous mimicry of habitual gestures. Margaret Hale, composed and reserved, observed the room with calculated restraint, but her eyes betrayed a mind already cataloguing every movement. The detective's thoughts returned to the ribbon. Its position near the center of the table, the undisturbed bow, the precise folds, all were deliberate. Yet the fibers, inconspicuous, though they were, revealed far more than the superficial appearance of perfection. Poirot understood instinctively that the person who had touched both the gift and the wineglass had done so with confidence, fully aware of the consequences, fully believing that no one could detect the faintest trace. Poirot crouched again, examining the broken shards of the wineglass. Carefully he ran his gloved hand over the jagged edges. There, embedded almost invisibly, were fibers identical to those on the ribbon. The precision was remarkable. The handling must have been calm, unhurried, and deliberate, as though the hand knew exactly where to place each object and how to avoid detection. "Details, mes amis," Poirot said softly, rising to his full height. "Always choose their owner. And in this instance, the owner has been clever, patient, and precise. A casual observer would see nothing, yet the meticulous mind, the careful hand cannot hide entirely. It leaves traces invisible but present, waiting for the eye that observes." He allowed himself a moment to study the guests once more. Each face displayed its habitual calm, yet beneath that veneer, Subtle signs betrayed awareness. The trembling of Eleanor's fingers, Jonathan's restless shifts, Margaret's analytical gaze. These were fragments of truth, small but significant. They would guide him, as the fibers had, to the mind behind the act. Poirot then turned his attention back to the crimson ribbon. He lifted it delicately, noting the direction of the fibers, the precise way they had been caught on the edges, the faint smudge of residue. A story unfolded silently. The person had handled the gift with intention, had ensured contact with Victor Hale's wineglass, and had done so without hesitation or nervousness. Confidence, patience, and knowledge of the victim's habits were evident. The detective's mind began to map the sequence, the preparation, the placement of the gift, the timing of Victor's collapse, the spill of wine, the undisturbed package, all meticulously choreographed. The hand that orchestrated this was calm, practiced, and unerringly precise. It was the hand of someone used to planning, someone who understood subtlety, someone who trusted in their own foresight. Poirot turned to the room once more, his eyes sweeping across every face, noting the smallest reactions to his examination. "It is remarkable," he said softly, "how much the smallest objects can reveal. The hand that is careful, the hand that is patient, leaves behind traces, traces that speak more eloquently than words." Eleanor shifted slightly in her chair, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks, almost imperceptibly. Margaret leaned forward ever so slightly, eyes narrowing as if measuring distances and angles. Each movement, seemingly casual, carried meaning for Poirot. Each gesture was a potential fragment of truth. The crimson ribbon, now removed carefully and placed in a small evidence envelope, seemed almost alive in its silence. It had been the medium of contact, the subtle bridge between objects and the silent witness to intent. Poirot held it for a moment longer, noting the fibers once more, before placing it aside. "The crime, mes amis," he said quietly, "is revealed not by force or spectacle, but by observation, by patience, and by reason. The evidence is subtle, yet unmistakable, and it will guide us inexorably to the mind that wove this intricate design." He allowed the room to absorb his words, letting the weight of the invisible threads settle over the guests, the unspoken knowledge that someone among them had acted with precision, that the act had been deliberate, and that it left behind invisible traces, hung like a tangible presence. Poirot stepped back, considering the broader pattern, the crimson thread, the fibers, the careful placement, and the timing all converged to reveal an intellect at work. One that was confident, deliberate, and utterly meticulous. His mind traced the invisible connections, linking motive, opportunity, and skill. "Ah," Poirot whispered to himself, his eyes narrowing with the faintest smile, "the threads are visible to those who know how to see. And once the pattern is known, the hand that wove it will be unmistakable. Patience, observation, reason, they are all allies in the pursuit of truth." Outside, the snow continued to fall, pure and unbroken, while inside, the Langford drawing room had become a theater of invisible connections. Every gesture, every fiber, every minute detail now formed part of the tapestry of discovery, and Hercule Poirot, as always, would follow these threads to their source, unraveling the meticulous design with precision, patience, and the incomparable art of deduction. Chapter 7. The poisoned pour. The aftermath of Victor Hale's sudden collapse lingered like a heavy fog across Langford Manor. The initial shock had subsided, yet the room was far from returning to its earlier cheer. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the polished floor, and the snow outside thickened, muffling all sound from the surrounding countryside. Within these walls, however, the silence was no longer tranquil. It was a taut anticipation, a prelude to discovery. Poirot, small, precise, and immovable, had begun his methodical survey of the evening's events. Each guest, each object, each subtle movement was under scrutiny. The crimson gift, still untouched, remained the silent epicenter of intrigue. But the detective's mind, agile and unyielding, had begun to trace another thread, the fatal act itself, The moment Victor Hale drank, the instrument of death, the exact path through which the poison entered his system. Every detail matters, Poirot murmured softly, his voice a gentle ripple in the tense quiet. The poison, like all cunning plans, is deliberate. It must be traced to its source, and the source is rarely where one first supposes. Poirot's sharp eyes returned to the scene of the collapse. The wine glass, shattered upon the floor, had been the vessel of death, yet its victim had not struggled, had not hesitated, and had displayed no outward sign of warning. The poison had been colorless, odorless, and swift, a silent companion to Victor's final gesture of polite celebration. He crouched beside the fragments of crystal, inspecting each shard. There was no contamination visible to the naked eye, no external sign of tampering. But Poirot knew that subtlety was the hallmark of intelligence. The most effective poisoners were those who moved with absolute calm, their acts hidden in plain sight. His mind traced the sequence. Victor had been served a final drink before the gift could be opened. Only one person had poured that glass. Only one hand had controlled the vessel that delivered death. It was a moment of ordinary courtesy, a gesture designed to appear innocent, yet within that simplicity lay precision. Poirot rose and turned to Jonathan Reeves, Victor's assistant, whose posture was now more rigid, more attentive. He had been the one to offer the glass. He had admitted, claiming it was merely a minor courtesy, an act of service to a host known for his hospitality. Yet Poirot's observations told another story, a story in which opportunity, knowledge, and intent intersected with deadly effectiveness. "Ah, Monsieur Reeves," Poirot said gently, moving toward him. "Let us consider the final drink. You were the one who poured it." Jonathan nodded, attempting calm, offering a polite smile. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, just a small courtesy." Victor had requested a final glass of wine before the evening ended. Poirot's small eyes narrowed, his mind spinning through calculations, observations, and minute deductions. A courtesy, yes, but it carried a most extraordinary consequence. Observe, mes amis. That kindness, like the human hand itself, can be prepared as a weapon. The poison was colorless, almost invisible, yet it worked with perfect efficacy, and the hand that poured it knew precisely what it carried. Poirot moved slowly around the room, his gaze now taking in the reactions of the guests. Eleanor Markham had become unusually still, her hands pressed lightly against her lap. Margaret Hale remained composed, analytical, yet her eyes flickered momentarily toward Reeves, as though registering the implications of his act. Helena Hale's lips pursed in a subtle, almost imperceptible line, betraying an inward calculation. The detective returned to Jonathan Reeves, speaking softly, almost conspiratorially. "You poured the wine, that is evident. But tell me, was there any other preparation involved? Any circumstance beyond the ordinary act of service?" Jonathan's hesitation, almost invisible, betrayed more than he intended. A flicker in his eyes, a momentary tightening of his jaw, a subtle tremor of his hand. These were the marks of someone aware that scrutiny had reached a point too precise to overlook. Poirot observed, catalogued, and processed. The wine, colorless and unremarkable, had hidden a deadly secret. The hand that handled it, calm, deliberate, confident, had controlled the chain of events that led to Victor's collapse. Every action, however polite and ordinary it seemed, had been chosen with exactitude. "Kindness," Poirot murmured, pacing slowly across the room, "is merely a mask, and the most dangerous acts often wear the most benign faces." The glass was ordinary, the wine was ordinary. Yet within this simplicity lay extraordinary precision, executed without hesitation, with confidence, and with perfect timing. Poirot's eyes swept across the guests again, noting every micro-reaction. Eleanor's slight stiffening, Helena's subtle frown, Margaret's narrowed gaze. Each was a reflection of thought, fear, or awareness. Even Jonathan, though outwardly composed, exhibited signs of tension. The detective returned to the spilled remnants of the glass. He crouched, inspecting the fragments under the firelight. "Ah," he whispered to himself, the colorless, the silent, the unseen. It is here that cunning is revealed. The victim does not see, does not resist, and does not struggle. Yet the intention is clear, and the method careful, deliberate, brilliant, is unmistakable. He straightened, allowing his attention to encompass the room. The act, while seemingly simple, had been executed with meticulous foresight. The glass had been poured, delivered, and left to its fatal task. Yet every element had been controlled. Poirot noted the precise movements, the sequence of delivery, the positioning of the guests, and the placement of the crimson gift. "Observe," Poirot said softly, addressing the room, "that the final act of service, polite, considerate, entirely ordinary, can conceal a most extraordinary outcome. The hand that pours, the mind that plans, the timing that executes. These combine to transform courtesy into a mechanism of death, and the instrument, Miss Amos, was the wine itself, subtle, invisible, perfectly delivered." Poirot's gaze returned to Jonathan Reeves. "You acted with calmness, monsieur. That is evident. But calmness is never accidental in such precise affairs. It is the companion of calculation and intention. And the companion, Mes Amis, always leaves traces. Small, almost invisible traces, yet sufficient for the observant eye to follow." He glanced briefly toward the crimson gift. Though untouched, it had played its part, a silent catalyst of attention and expectation, a pivot around which the evening's fatal events had revolved. Poirot understood now that the act of poisoning, though executed through a simple glass, was connected to the greater orchestration, the interplay of motives, opportunities, and subtle manipulations that defined this intricate design. The guests, observing Poirot's inspection, were increasingly aware of the invisible forces shaping the evening. Suspicion and tension had deepened. Even the most careful composure could not mask the awareness that the act had been deliberate, that the poison had been calculated, and that the chain of cause and effect was both subtle and inescapable. Poirot, small, precise, and unyielding, allowed himself a faint smile. The hand is revealed, the method is clear, and the instrument speaks with perfect eloquence. And now, mas amis, we must follow the remaining threads, for the person who wove this plan has left behind their signature in detail, in movement, in timing. All that remains is to discern the final pattern, to understand intention, and to see the mind behind the action. Chapter 8. The Gift's True Purpose. The Langford drawing room was quieter than ever. The snow outside had grown heavier, muffling the world beyond the manor walls, leaving only the interior, glowing with firelight, for the events to unfold. Every guest now felt the oppressive weight of suspense, their polite effets slipping ever so slightly under the strain of observation and uncertainty. The evening had evolved from celebration to tragedy, then to investigation, and now, with Poirot's attention focused intensely upon the crimson gift, to revelation. The box itself sat at the center of the table, still pristine, still undisturbed, still silently accusing. Its presence had dominated the night. First as an object of curiosity, then as a potential instrument of danger, and finally as a symbol of truth yet to be uncovered. Poirot approached it slowly, deliberately, as though each step carried him closer, not merely to the package but to the hidden motives of human hearts. "The gift," Poirot murmured, "does not always bring joy, mes amis. Sometimes it carries a truth so precise, so delicate, that only the eyes of reason can read it. And yet, even the most cautious observer may miss it if they fail to perceive the invisible." Poirot gently untied the crimson ribbon, noting with satisfaction that it bore no further evidence of tampering. The bough fell apart neatly under his gloved hands. He lifted the lid of the box, revealing its contents, a carefully bundled collection of letters, yellowed with age but preserved with meticulous care. The letters, addressed to Victor Hale over many years, had been written by various individuals in confidence. Each contained information about minor financial discrepancies, small deceptions, and matters of personal trust. Taken individually, they appeared mundane. Together, however, they formed a pattern, a careful record of misappropriations, omissions, and deceptions that implicated one person above all others. Jonathan Reeves, the assistant. Poirot laid the letters out upon the table with deliberate precision, scanning each in turn. He noted the handwriting, the dates, the subtle cross, references, the ink smudges and corrections, all revealing the meticulous care with which Victor had preserved the record. Each letter was a testament to his patience, to his desire to reveal truth only at the proper moment, after no fail, when the proper audience could understand the full measure of the deception. Poirot addressed the assembled guests, his voice calm yet firm. You see, mes amis, the Crimson Gift was intended for revelation, not for celebration. It was carefully prepared by Victor Hale to expose duplicity, to bring truth to light. He planned for these letters to be read after the festivities, in order to maintain propriety, to ensure that justice, moral justice, would follow the proper sequence. The guests leaned forward, drawn by the weight of revelation. Eleanor Markham's eyes flickered toward Jonathan, a mixture of curiosity and dawning comprehension in her expression. Margaret Hale's analytical gaze studied every gesture, while Helena Hale's subtle frown deepened, her mind clearly tracing the implications of her brother's careful planning. Poirot's attention, however, remained fixed upon Jonathan Reeves. The assistant's composure had begun to crack, albeit subtly. His hands, once confident, now fidgeted slightly with the edge of his cuff, and his eyes betrayed a flash of unease as he glanced toward the letters laid before them all. Monsieur Reeves, Poirot said softly, almost conversationally. It seems that your stewardship of Victor Hale's affairs was less than entirely transparent. The letters in this box contain careful documentation of errors, misappropriations, and omissions that, when brought together, reveal a long pattern of deception. Jonathan shifted in his seat, attempting a smile, but it lacked conviction. I do not know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot, he said, though his voice wavered slightly. Poirot's small eyes narrowed, catching the subtlest flicker of recognition and fear. Ah, but you do know, monsieur. The letters are precise, deliberate, and carefully preserved. Your actions have been chronicled, not by speculation, but by fact, and by the patient observation of Victor Hale himself. He intended, after no fail, to reveal the truth to those who had been most affected by your actions. He gestured toward the letters. The gift was never intended for delight. It was not to bring joy, mes amis. It was to illuminate truth, to confront duplicity, and to reveal the carefully concealed patterns of behavior that had remained hidden. Victor Hale, patient and precise, had prepared this revelation for the proper occasion. And yet, mes amis, the true tragedy is that he did not survive to deliver it personally. Eleanor Markham leaned forward, whispering softly. So, the gift itself was never dangerous. The danger was elsewhere. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, madame, the gift was merely the instrument of revelation, not the instrument of death. The poison, the careful timing, the glass, all of that was external to the gift. And yet, the gift was the pivot of the evening, drawing attention and focus, ensuring that Victor would handle matters precisely. In his mind, the letters would remain a catalyst for moral justice. But death intervened before the intended moment. Margaret Hale observed the letters, tracing the dates with her finger. It is meticulous, each detail accounted for. He must have known the risk of deceit and wanted the record to speak in his absence. Poirot's small, dark eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Exactly, Mademoiselle Victor Hale was not careless. He had foreseen the necessity of evidence, the inevitability of motive, and the need for clarity. His letters, carefully collected, were designed to reveal truth. And now we see the pattern. The person who acted to hasten his death was the same person whose deception was recorded here, the assistant, Monsieur Reeves. Jonathan's composure faltered further. His hand went to the edge of his chair, gripping it tightly, and a faint tremor betrayed the depth of his unease. I didn't mean, he began, but Poirot's sharp eyes interrupted him silently. Your intent is now apparent, monsieur, Poirot said quietly, stepping closer. The opportunity, the timing, the choice of instrument, all were calculated to prevent Victor Hale from revealing these letters, from exposing long-standing deception. Yet, as always, intention leaves traces. Patience, observation, and reason can unravel even the most cunning designs. Poirot allowed the room to absorb the revelation. The tension, the fear, the suspicion, all now had a focus, a central figure. Jonathan Reeves, who had seemed merely an assistant, was revealed as the architect behind the attempt to suppress truth. The Crimson Gift, far from being a tool of celebration, had been a meticulous instrument of moral reckoning, a device designed to illuminate duplicity and reveal the consequences of betrayal. Poirot paused, allowing a brief silence to settle over the room. He observed the micro-reactions, Eleanor's shock, Helena's subtle calculation, Margaret's analytical fascination. Each guest processed the implications of Victor's plan and Jonathan's treachery in their own way. "The lesson, mes amis," Poirot said finally, "is that appearances can deceive. A gift, a courtesy, a gesture of celebration, all can conceal deeper intentions. And yet, the truth, carefully documented and patiently preserved, always finds a way to emerge. The crimson box, once merely a mystery, is now the herald of justice. The gift was not for joy, but for truth. And truth, like the most subtle poison, cannot be denied when examined with reason and observation." The snow outside had grown silent, the wind stilled, and within the Langford drawing room, the true nature of the evening's drama was revealed. The crimson box, the careful letters, and the precision of observation had illuminated deception in its purest form, and Poirot, as ever, stood at the center of revelation, patient, meticulous, and victorious in the pursuit of truth. Chapter 9. A confession by candlelight. The Langford drawing room was bathed in the mellow, flickering glow of the fire and the soft light of a few strategically placed candles. Shadows danced upon the walls and across the polished floor, lending the evening a theatrical quality, as though the room itself had become an accomplice in the unfolding drama. Outside, the snow pressed against the windows, silent, white, and absolute, a quiet mirror to the silence that had settled among the guests within. Poirot, small and composed, stood near the hearth, his hands folded, his eyes sharp and discerning. The letters from the Crimson Gift lay on the table in meticulous order, each document a testament to Victor Hale's patient and deliberate collection of truth. And now, after careful observation, reasoning, and deduction, Poirot prepared to confront the man whose actions had disrupted both the peace of no fay and the moral equilibrium of the household. Jonathan Reeves, the assistant, remained seated, his posture still deceptively upright. Yet the earlier facade of confidence had been shattered. His hands fidgeted with the cuffs of his jacket, his eyes darted nervously from Poirot to the letters, then to the unbroken Crimson Gift. A man trained to appear unflappable now, betrayed every micro-expression of fear, the tremor of a finger, the fleeting blanch of a cheek, the brief hesitation before swallowing. Poirot approached slowly, deliberately, allowing his measured presence to weigh upon the man without the need for raised voice or dramatics. "Monsieur Reeves," he began softly, "you have been observed carefully, not by chance, not by suspicion alone, but by reason, by patience, and by the inexorable light of detail." Jonathan's hands tightened upon his knees. I don't know what you mean," he said, attempting to maintain composure. His voice, however, betrayed the tremor of unease that Poirot had long since catalogued. Poirot's small eyes, dark and piercing, fixed upon him with unerring precision. "Ah, but you do know. You handled the glass. You acted to prevent Victor Hale from revealing the truth contained in these letters. The poison, careful, colorless, delivered with calm confidence, was your chosen instrument. Yet the hand that plots with patience cannot hide entirely, for even the calmest hand leaves traces, traces which I, mes amis, have observed." The room seemed to shrink around Jonathan Reeves. Every guest present felt the weight of the moment. Eleanor Markham, Helena Hale, and Margaret Hale each leaned forward, their expressions taut, alert, and expectant. Even in the soft candlelight, every subtle movement, the quick glance, the shallow breath, the slight tremor, betrayed the inner reckoning of a guilty mind. Jonathan's composure faltered completely. His shoulders slumped, and a faint pallor overtook his normally ruddy complexion. I only wanted to prevent him from revealing the truth," he stammered, his voice small and quivering. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was just the wine, I never thought." Poirot's voice was soft, precise, but carried a weight that made hesitation impossible. "Monsieur Reeves, you acted from fear and self-preservation. You understood clearly that the letters would expose long-standing deception. Your intellect allowed you to plan, to act with precision, and yet the moral weight of the act, the actual consequences, escaped your calculation." The poison silenced the man. "Yes, but not the evidence, not the truth. And the law, mes amis, does not forgive even if the heart desires mercy." Jonathan buried his face briefly in his hands, then lifted it, eyes wet and unsteady. "I only wanted to protect myself, the accounts, the reputation, I thought. I thought he would forgive me if I fixed it quietly. I never wanted to kill him." Poirot moved closer, the candlelight glinting against his small frame, accentuating the sharp lines of observation etched into his face. "You acted under fear, under self-interest. But fear is no excuse. Planning, execution, and methodical precision are not absolved by the wishes of the heart. Christmas, indeed, may inspire forgiveness in sentiment. But the law, monsieur, is a mistress of reason, not of sentiment." Eleanor Markham's breath caught. He admits it. He did it. All of it." Poirot's eyes, calm but intense, never left Jonathan's face. "Yes, Madame, admission is the beginning, not the conclusion. The confession, when paired with evidence, letters, fibers, sequence, and observation, reveals the full extent of the design. The crime is no longer hypothetical. It is manifest, inevitable, and undeniable." Jonathan slumped further, his hands shaking. I thought, I could stop him quietly. I never meant for him to die." Poirot's small hand, delicate but firm, rested upon the edge of the table, near the Crimson Gift. "Intent, monsieur, is measured not by desire alone, but by action. You executed the act with deliberation. The instrument, the wine, the timing, the absence of struggle, all these reveal the care with which you planned, and the knowledge with which you acted. And so, the law will now take its course." The assistant's shoulders sagged beneath the weight of understanding. Fear had struck faster than reason. Panic had overtaken deliberation. Every detail that Poirot had observed, the calm handling of the glass, the precise delivery of the poisoned wine, the intention to silence the truth, now converged upon the confession. The crime, meticulous and calculated, could no longer hide behind civility or courtesy. Poirot spoke again, softly, almost as if narrating a moral lesson. "The tragedy lies not in the cleverness of the act, nor in the courage or fear behind it, but in the inevitability of consequence. The poisoned pour silenced Victor Hale, but it could not silence reason, observation, or truth. And while the heart may wish for mercy, the principles of justice remain unyielding. Christmas may forgive sentimentally, but the law does not. That, monsieur, is the certainty which governs all actions and all consequences." The room was silent, save for the soft crackle of the fire and the occasional drip of melting snow from the window ledge. Jonathan Reeves sat defeated, stripped of composure, as if the weight of both confession and inevitable judgment had aged him years in an instant. The guests, though relieved to have clarity, felt the profound gravity of the moral and legal reckoning. Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting every expression, every reaction, every flicker of comprehension and subtle relief. He turned finally to the Crimson Gift, still pristine, still central, still a silent witness to the events it had catalyzed. It had served its purpose, revealing truth, documenting deception, and guiding justice, even if indirectly. "The final confession," Poirot said quietly, almost to himself, "is the most elegant proof of all. Fear cannot lie. Monsieur cannot hide, and the moral universe, however slowly, demonstrates its justice. The poisoned paw silenced one man, but it illuminated the entire chain of human intent. And that, Miss Amos, is the lesson this no fae offers. The snow outside continued its steady fall, white and unbroken, while inside, the Langford drawing-room became a space of reckoning. Justice, patience, and observation had united, revealing the hidden threads that bound motive, action, and consequence. And Hercule Poirot, as always, had guided the truth into the open, precise, patient, and elegantly inevitable. Chapter 10, after the candles' fade morning arrived, with an almost tender light, softening the austere lines of Langford Manor. The snow outside had thickened overnight, cloaking the world in a silence, so complete it seemed to absorb both sound and memory. Yet no blanket of white could erase the events that had unfolded within the walls of that house. Victor Hale was gone. The Crimson Gift had revealed more than intended, and Jonathan Reeves had confessed to actions that could never be undone. Justice, meticulous and patient, had claimed its due. Poirot and I sat in the small café a few streets away, far removed from the cold grandeur of the manor. The air was warm, tinged with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the gentle hum of early patrons. It was a refuge, a place where observation and reflection could unfold without urgency. Yet even here the events of no fail remained vivid in my mind. Poirot sipped his coffee slowly, savoring the heat and taste, his small, dark eyes resting on the table as though it held the final threads of a complex tapestry. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he allowed the quiet to stretch, giving form to his thoughts, before releasing them. "Monday, Amy," he said at last, his voice measured, deliberate. "We have observed human nature in its most intricate forms." The evening at Langford Manor was, superficially, a gathering for celebration. Yet beneath the veneer of festivity lay ambition, fear, and desire. The hand that delivers courtesy can, indeed, conceal peril. The gifts we give and the gifts we receive may carry far heavier burdens than paper and ribbon can contain. I nodded, recalling the Crimson Gift and the careful letters it contained. The gift, I said, was meant to expose deception, not to harm. Yet it became the focal point of a tragic chain of events. Poirot's eyes flickered with satisfaction, tempered by the gravity of reflection. Exactment, Victor Hale was precise, patient, and just. He intended the gift to reveal truth after no fae, in order to maintain order, propriety, and clarity. Yet the actions of Jonathan Reeves intervened, transforming what should have been moral illumination into tragedy. And here, mon ami, is the lesson: the intention of the innocent, when interrupted by fear and ambition, can become perilous. He paused, swirling his coffee thoughtfully. Observe, the hand that poisons, the mind that conceals, the fear that drives action, each leaves its trace. Yet patience, observation, and reason are equally precise. They reveal what the reckless or dishonest cannot hide. The crimson thread, the poisoned paw, the confession, all these were inevitable once observed carefully. Nature abhors disorder, and the human mind, guided by reason, eventually restores balance. I could not help but glance toward the window, where the snow muffled the world outside. "Even with justice served," I said softly, "there is a weight that lingers. The celebration was gone, the holiday reduced to observation and consequence. Does the heart ever recover from that?" Poirot's small, deliberate smile carried both wisdom and melancholy. "Ah, mon ami, the heart does not recover in haste, nor is it meant to. The human conscience, like the mind, requires reckoning. Christmas, in sentiment, may forgive, the law in reason does not. And the truth, no matter how late, must be revealed. That is the balance that governs life, morality, and justice." He set his cup down, small fingers interlaced. "Consider, too, the nature of the Crimson Gift, red, vibrant, commanding attention. It appears joyous, celebratory, even innocent, yet it carries consequences heavier than any ornament upon the tree. In its stillness lay revelation. In its silence lay judgment. Some gifts, my friend, are wrapped in red, but carry only guilt." I reflected on the night, the carefully orchestrated murder, the precision of observation, and Poirot's unwavering ability to see through appearances. Every detail mattered. The fibers on the ribbon, the broken wine glass, the timing of the pour, the letters, and ultimately, the confession. Each element had been a thread in an invisible tapestry of cause and effect, meticulously unraveled by the keenest mind I had ever known. Poirot leaned back slightly, eyes distant yet alive with the satisfaction of resolution. "Monday, Ami," he said, his voice softening. "We must understand that life is often a mixture of joy and consequence. Events may appear festive, yet beneath them lies a matrix of intention, fear, and calculation. Our task is to observe, to reason, and to restore clarity where confusion and deception have taken hold." I watched him, aware of the quiet dignity with which he carried the weight of understanding. It was not triumph in the conventional sense. It was the triumph of reason, of meticulous observation, and of moral reckoning. Justice had been served, not by emotion, nor by haste, but by the patient and unyielding application of intellect and discernment. The cafe had grown busier, patrons speaking quietly over their drinks, oblivious to the moral and criminal dramas that had played out elsewhere. Yet in our small corner, Poirot and I remained connected to the events of No Fail, reflecting on the human heart, the inevitability of consequence, and the precision with which truth can be revealed. "Some gifts," Poirot repeated, eyes fixed on the steaming coffee cup before him, "appear to carry delight. Others, as we have seen, carry truth. And truth, like the hand that observes, never forgets. It waits patiently until the mind is ready to recognize it. That is why the smallest details, the subtlest gestures, and the quietest evidence are the most revealing. They illuminate intention, motive, and consequence, often when the world believes itself in ignorance." I nodded, understanding fully now the elegance of his reasoning. The events at Langford Manor, the Crimson Gift, the poisoned pour, the confession, all were bound by invisible threads. Threads that Poirot had followed with extraordinary patience and skill. The night had been one of revelation, of tragedy, and of moral clarity, and the lessons it carried would linger, carefully observed, for years to come. The café hummed gently around us, but within the quiet corner where Poirot and I sat, the world had narrowed to understanding, reason, and the aftermath of a crime revealed. Morning light softened the edges of memory, but the truth, the painstakingly observed, meticulously unraveled truth, remained vivid, unshaken, and complete. "Justice," Poirot said at last, his voice almost a whisper, "is not always joyful, mon ami, but it is inevitable, and the gifts that carry guilt, like the crimson thread of this No Fail, remind us that even in celebration, one must always observe, reason, and measure the human heart." I watched him sip his coffee, small, deliberate, content in the quiet triumph of intellect and morality. The snow outside was pure, serene, and unbroken, a silent witness to what had transpired. Inside, however, the lessons of No Fail, the Crimson Gift, and the poisoned pour lingered, a reminder that human actions, however hidden, ultimately reveal themselves to the careful eye. And with that, the tale of the Crimson Gift, of ambition, fear, and revelation drew to a close.